Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we are cracking open a fascinating source that shines a spotlight on something absolutely essential, but often hidden when we think about keeping planes safe in the sky. We're diving deep into human factors in aviation maintenance.
Yeah, it's such a critical layer of aviation safety. I mean, we often focus on the pilots or maybe the technology in the cockpit, right?
Right.
But the work done on the ground, the inspection, the repair, all those countless maintenance tasks, that's really the foundation everything else relies on.
Absolutely. And our source material for this deep dive isn't just some high-level overview. It's actually pulled from a certification training module for aviation maintenance technicians, AMTs, aiming for ES certification.
Okay, so proper training stuff.
Exactly. So it's packed with fundamental concepts, real-world examples, and some, well, really surprising insights into why things can go wrong, even when you have highly skilled, dedicated people on the job.
And that's key, isn't it? This material is designed to be foundational for anyone in maintenance. It really shows that human factors aren't, a soft skill or some kind of afterthought.
Oh.
They are absolutely fundamental to preventing errors.
So our mission today is to act as your guides through this material, pulling out the most important nuggets of knowledge. What are the core ideas? What are the surprising ways our very human nature impacts this kind of precision work? And why does understanding this matter, not just if you're an AMT, but really for anyone interacting with complex systems under pressure?
Yeah, exactly. As the source itself notes, these principles, they apply far beyond the hangar. I mean, if you're in any field where human decision-making, teamwork, and, environmental conditions interact with complex procedures,
You'll see parallels.
you'll definitely find relevance here.
Exactly. So whether you're preparing for a meeting about process reliability, maybe managing a team, or you're simply curious about the unseen forces keeping aircraft safe, this deep dive is for you. Okay, let's unpack the source and see what it reveals. So, right off the bat, the source hammers home why human factors are cited as being so important in aviation maintenance. What's the headline here?
Well, the most striking statistic, and it really jumps out, is that human error is cited as the primary cause of almost all aviation incidents and accidents.
Wow, almost all. That really puts the weight of this topic into perspective immediately. It's not just a factor.
No.
It's the primary one.
Precisely. It just underscores that while, technical skill is necessary, it's simply not enough on its own. Aviation safety is built on correct maintenance.
Right.
And when maintenance errors happen, they are major contributors to things going wrong later down the line.
And the source points out a particularly insidious characteristic of maintenance errors, doesn't it? That they can be hidden.
Yes, exactly. They call them latent errors. Things like an incorrect part installed, maybe a missed check, a nut left untorqued.
Things you might not spot right away.
Exactly. These issues aren't always obvious during a visual check immediately after the task. They can just sit there, hidden in the system for a long time, only manifesting as a safety problem much later, sometimes many, many flight hours later.
So AMTs face unique challenges compared to, say, pilots who often have more immediate feedback loops in flight.
Absolutely. The nature of the tasks, they're often complex, sometimes physically demanding, done in all sorts of environments.
Yeah.
Combined with that potential for errors to be hidden and delayed, it creates a really distinct set of human factors challenges.
And understanding these challenges isn't just about preventing accidents, though obviously that's paramount. The source lists other benefits too.
Yeah, definitely. Improved quality of work, a safer physical environment, fostering a more responsible workforce, and also tangible benefits like reduced costs from rework, fewer injuries, increased efficiency, that kind of thing.
The key takeaway here seems to be that human factors isn't just another, compliance box to tick.
No, not at all.
It's fundamentally woven into the fabric of doing the job safely and effectively every single day.
Exactly. It's really a way of looking at your work and the whole system you operate within.
Okay, so to help grapple with the sheer complexity of how people interact with these maintenance systems, the source introduces some helpful models. Where do we start?
Well, a key model used quite a bit in maintenance is called PEAR.
Okay.
It provides a pretty simple framework to think about where human factors influences might creep in.
P. Okay, break it down for us.
So P stands for people.
Yeah.
This covers the individuals doing the work, their capabilities, their attitudes, how they interact, their inherent human limitations.
Like vision, hearing.
Exactly. Things like their vision, hearing, memory, all that stuff.
So the person themselves is the starting point.
Yes. Then E is for environment. And this covers both the physical workplace, the lighting, noise, temperature, weather, and also the organizational environment. the company culture, management style, the norms of the team. The source actually uses a powerful example of working outside at night with just terrible lighting from a tug's headlights.
Oh, yeah.
And it immediately shows how that physical environment can directly contribute to making errors.
That makes it very concrete. The environment isn't just background noise, it's an active player.
Indeed. Then A is for action. This refers to the tasks being performed, the procedures you're supposed to follow, the paperwork like job cards, even the design of the equipment itself.
Are the procedures clear? Is the design intuitive?
Exactly, those kinds of questions.
And finally, R.
R is for resources. Do people have what they need to actually do the job right? This includes the right tools, correct parts, adequate equipment, up-to-date documentation, suitable facilities like a hangar, and crucially, enough time and qualified people.
Yeah.
A lack of any of those can force people into difficult choices that definitely increase risk.
So, peer gives you a lens to analyze any situation, really, successful or not, just by looking at these 4 interacting elements. The people, their environment, the action they're taking, and the resources they have.
It really helps shift the focus from just blaming an individual,
Right.
to understanding the whole system context.
Yeah.
Now, another widely referenced framework, this one originated from Transport Canada, is called the Dirty Dozen.
Ah, the Dirty Dozen. That sounds like a rogues gallery of human factors issues.
It kind of is.
Yeah.
It lists 12 specific human factors that are just consistently found to contribute to maintenance errors. They're often seen as the preconditions that make an error more likely to happen.
Okay, can you list them? I'm curious now.
Sure. It's lack of communication, distraction, lack of resources, stress, complacency, lack of teamwork, pressure, lack of awareness, lack of knowledge, fatigue, lack of assertiveness, and norms.
That list feels very comprehensive. It really captures a lot of the day-to-day challenges people face, doesn't it?
It does.
Yeah.
And the source specifically highlights complacency as being particularly dangerous. It's often cited right at the top of the list.
Really?
Yeah, and referred to as one of the deadliest factors. We'll probably touch on many of these as we go, but the Dirty Dozen is a really powerful reminder of the common patterns in why errors happen.
Okay, let's dive deeper then into the people element, especially our, inherent capabilities and limitations. The source spends quite a bit of time on this, detailing things like vision, hearing, how we process information. Why is understanding our own sort of physical and mental machinery so crucial in maintenance?
Well, because maintenance work relies so heavily on observation,
Oh.
right? Fine motor skills, cognitive processing. But our human systems, they're not perfect. They have limitations, and they can be pretty easily degraded. Take vision, for example.
Yeah.
It's absolutely fundamental for inspection, identifying defects, reading instructions.
The source lists the parts of the eye, which is interesting background, but the real human factors insight is about the limitations and how they get affected, right?
Exactly. We need good visual acuity, sharpness, but that gets reduced when we're tired. Then there are common age-related issues like presbyopia.
Where you can't focus up close as well.
Right. Your ability to focus up close declines. And considering the aging workforce mentioned in the source, like an average age of 53 in the U.S., 58 in Australia,
Oh.
this is a really significant factor for detailed inspection work.
And the source mentions challenges even with vision correction, like how bifocals can create awkward zones of vision, needing specific head movements just to see clearly.
Yes. It's not just about having glasses. It's understanding how they impact the field of vision and the ease of vision during a specific task. And color vision is another critical one.
For wires and components.
Yeah, recognizing color-coded wires, components, indicators essential. Red-green deficiency is surprisingly common. Affects about 8% of men.
8%. That's a lot.
It is. And they often see these colors as just shades of gray.
And environmental factors or even substances can impact vision too.
Absolutely. Glare from bright lights or reflections reduces visibility. Moving from bright sunlight into a dim hangar requires adaptation time. Your eyes can take, get this, up to 30 minutes to become fully sensitive in low light.
30 minutes.
Yeah.
Wow.
And substances like alcohol, certain medications, even the carbon monoxide from smoking can reduce oxygen to the eyes, impairing vision. The key takeaway really is that vision, our primary tool for inspection, is vulnerable. We need to consciously consider these factors.
Okay, what about hearing? Aviation environments are just inherently noisy places.
Yeah, and high noise levels are more than just annoying. They're physically fatiguing and can significantly impact our ability to concentrate on cognitive tasks. While the source explains the mechanics of the ear, the human factors point is really about that performance degradation in noisy environment.
And hearing protection is necessary, obviously, but it also creates its own set of human factors issues.
Right. Earplugs or muffs, they reduce noise, but they can interfere with verbal communication, which is crucial for teamwork, handovers, and they can mask warning sounds. The source recommends using protection consistently above 115 dB, like near running engines, but ideally, organizations should try to address the noise at the source first, if possible.
So mitigating one hazard can introduce others?
That's the insight.
Yeah.
Mitigating noise can introduce communication breakdowns or missed warnings.
So our senses have built-in limits, easily affected by external and internal factors. What about how our brains actually take all this sensory input and make sense of it? Information processing.
Okay, so the source outlines 5 stages: gathering, perception, evaluation, decision, execution, and feedback. We take in sensory data, but the magic and the risk happens in perception assessment.
Okay.
Our brain tries to make sense of the input, building a mental model of the situation. And this process is heavily influenced by our experience, our expectations, our biases.
And this is where things can go wrong.
Crucially, yes. While our brain is brilliant at filtering out non-relevant info and creating a coherent picture, it has this dangerous tendency to fill the gaps when information is missing. It uses what it expects to see, or what it knows from past experience. So if the situation is unusual or information is incomplete, this gap filling can lead straight to errors.
And confirmation bias must play a huge role here too.
Oh, absolutely. We are just wired to look for information that confirms our existing mental model or hypothesis. And we often unconsciously ignore or discount info that contradicts it.
Right.
The source gives classic examples like visual illusions or that famous study where just changing the word bump to crash influenced people's memory of a car accident.
Making them remember broken glass that wasn't there.
Exactly. It's fascinating and a little terrifying, right?
Yeah.
It shows how easily our perception and memory can be manipulated by context or just suggestion.
It really highlights the importance of situation awareness then, having an accurate, up-to-date mental picture of what's actually happening.
Yes, what's happening around you, the status of the aircraft system, how your task fits in, what others are doing, and our limited working memory holding only about, 7 plus or minus 2 items consciously?
Right, that classic number.
Yeah. That also restricts how much information we can actively process and retain, especially when we're under pressure or distracted.
So the key takeaway on human performance and limitations is that our fundamental tools, our senses, our brains, our memory, they're not perfect recording devices.
No.
They're interpretive systems, prone to error and degradation, and we need to build processes that actually account for that.
Precisely. And understanding that is critical for designing safer tasks and safer environments.
Okay, moving beyond the individual. Maintenance is often a team effort performed within an organization. The source delves into social psychology, how interactions, groups, culture influence performance.
Yeah, this is where we look at the human as a social being. Factors like motivation and demotivation are absolutely key. The source defines motivation as goal-directed behavior.
Okay.
And it highlights the difference between someone who can do the job, technically, and someone who will do the job reliably, which is driven by motivation.
And internal motivation is generally more powerful than external rewards or punishments.
Generally, yes. Doing something because it's inherently satisfying or aligned with your values tends to be more sustainable than just doing it for a reward or to avoid punishment. The source points out that external rewards work best when they're immediate and closely tied to the behavior.
Right.
Whereas delayed punishments can just breed resentment without necessarily improving safety behavior long term.
The classic Hawthorne effect fits in here too, right? The idea that people's performance improves just because they feel noticed and valued by management.
Yeah, it's a powerful reminder that human behavior in the workplace is influenced by more than just rules and tasks. Feeling cared for, feeling observed, it matters.
What about demotivators in the maintenance environment? What does the source highlight?
Things like poor leadership, a lack of feedback or recognition, feeling unfairly treated, difficult relationships with colleagues or supervisors, maybe unfair compensation, and definitely job insecurity.
Job security feels like a particularly tricky one. I mean, fear of losing your job could make you follow rules, but it could also create a negative can-do culture where people take shortcuts out of fear of falling behind or failing to meet, unrealistic deadlines.
Exactly. It can really discourage reporting issues or asking questions if there's a fear of reprisal. And peer pressure is another really significant social factor.
Ah.
That tendency to conform to what the group does, whether those are safe practices or risky shortcuts.
So if taking shortcuts is kind of the norm on your team, peer pressure can actually push individuals towards unsafe practices, even if they know better deep down.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And this is deeply tied to organizational culture, specifically safety culture. A strong safety culture isn't just posters on the wall, right?
No.
It's where safety is a genuinely shared value, where safe behavior is internalized by everyone, and management visibly supports and prioritizes safety outcomes. Workers feel empowered to identify and report issues without fear.
And a weak safety culture just tolerates the shortcuts and noncompliance.
Yes. It basically sends the message that getting the job done quickly is maybe more important than getting the job done safely. Team working is also fundamental here.
Okay.
Effective teams need clear goals, good communication, a shared understanding, supportive leadership and followership, and the ability to resolve conflict constructively.
Good leadership and followership are equally important. That's interesting.
Absolutely. A good leader manages the workload, motivates, directs. But good followers are professional, they work towards the goal, and crucially, they feel empowered to raise concerns or issues.
Yeah.
And clear procedures provide a vital baseline for consistent teamwork, especially when you're dealing with complex tasks.
And resolving conflict, the source says focus on the facts, not the emotions.
That's the ideal. Yeah, focus on what is right based on the facts and procedures rather than getting caught up in who is right. It requires active listening, trying to understand the other person's perspective.
The source also highlights the crucial role of management and supervision in all this.
Oh, definitely. Supervisors are really on the front lines. They need to be aware of potential errors, know their team's strengths and weaknesses, and actively prevent unsafe norms from developing.
But there's a risk for them, too.
Yeah, there's a risk that they can also get sucked into adopting those unsafe norms themselves, especially under pressure. It requires a conscious effort sometimes to step back and maintain perspective.
There's a scenario in the source about a fuel quantity indicator issue. It's the only aircraft available. There's intense pressure to meet a deadline. That feels like it pulls together a lot of these social factors.
It does. Pressure, resources, leadership decisions, teamwork.
Hmm?
It illustrates how these social and organizational factors aren't abstract concepts. They create real-world pressures that directly impact decision-making and the likelihood of errors on the ground.
Okay, so beyond those sort of chronic social dynamics, there are acute factors that can affect an AMT's performance on any given day. The source looks at things like fitness, stress, and fatigue.
Yes, these are really immediate human performance inhibitors. Fitness for work isn't just about physical health, although pre-employment checks do assess that.
Right.
It also includes your psychological state. If you're overly stressed, angry, worried, you might not actually be fit for a safety-critical task.
And the source notes there aren't really rigid rules here. It's complex and depends on the individual, the task, the environment.
Right. But, crucially, the AMT needs to have that self-awareness if their performance might be compromised. And the pressure from manpower shortages, which the source mentions, can make this difficult. It might push people to work while ill, which is a risk both for their own performance and obviously for infecting others.
Stress is called inevitable and potentially motivating, but also dangerous. How does that work?
Well, up to a certain point, stress can actually enhance focus and performance. But when it exceeds our adaptive capacity, performance degrades, often rapidly. Judgment deteriorates. The real danger is that stress is often insidious and cumulative. It builds up slowly over time, and we might not even recognize how much it's affecting us until performance drops sharply.
The source lists symptoms, physical, like headaches, maybe muscle pain, mental, like poor concentration or forgetfulness, behavioral, like making errors or having accidents.
Yes, recognizing these signs in yourself and in others is vital. The idea mentioned of a stress quiz, scoring life events.
Right, the cumulative points.
Yeah, it highlights this cumulative effect that seemingly unrelated life changes can add to your overall stress load and potentially impact your work performance down the track.
Time pressure and deadlines seem like obvious sources of stress and maintenance.
Oh, huge. Both externally imposed pressure and the pressure we put on ourselves. Managing this, especially during critical times like shift handovers, requires careful planning and really clear communication.
Workload issues, too, both overload and underload, they affect performance.
Definitely. Overload, just having too many tasks or tasks that are too complex, increases error likelihood. People might start omitting things, forgetting steps. Their logical thinking gets reduced.
Okay.
But underload is also a risk. Insufficient stimulus leads to boredom, loss of focus, reduced alertness, which can also cause errors, especially missed inspections.
Fatigue seems like one of the most discussed human factors in aviation, maybe across the board.
And for a very good reason. It's incredibly dangerous. The source distinguishes between acute fatigue, which a good sleep can fix, and chronic fatigue, which is that dangerous buildup of sleep debt over time.
What are the critical effects on performance that the source points out?
Losing the fight to stay awake is the big one, those frightening micro-sleeps.
Yeah.
Brief periods of unawareness where you might still perform simple actions, but have zero conscious control or memory of it afterwards. It severely impairs judgment, focus, coordination, memory.
So you might forget routine actions.
Easily. You're more susceptible to distraction, and critically, you're much more likely to miss defects during inspection because you just lack the attention needed to spot them.
The statistic from the source linking sleep-deprived individuals to significantly higher driving accident rates, that really underscores how widespread and dangerous fatigue is, even outside of work.
Exactly. The causes are often simple sleep debt. Many people just don't get the necessary 7-8 hours.
Right.
And also disruptions to our natural circadian rhythms, our internal body clock that regulates alertness. The window of circadian low, WOCL, typically in the early morning hours like 3 to 5 a.m.
Yeah.
That's a period of naturally lowest alertness, and shift work can obviously shift this dangerous period around. Plus sleep inertia, that grogginess right after waking, also impairs performance for a short time.
The tips for better sleep in the source are pretty straightforward but sound crucial as mitigation strategies.
Yeah. Avoiding caffeine, nicotine, alcohol before bed, managing worries, exercising earlier, cool, dark, quiet room, consistent schedule. Basic stuff, but it makes a difference.
Finally, in this section, the source addresses alcohol, medication, and drug abuse as major factors affecting fitness for work.
Yeah, basically any substance that impairs your physical or psychological capacity makes you unfit for safety-critical tasks. Alcohol is a depressant, it's absorbed quickly, affects judgment, troubleshooting.
Even small amounts.
Even small amounts can impact decision-making and sleep quality, which then affects daytime attention. The table in the source showing effects at different blood alcohol concentration levels is pretty sobering, literally and figuratively.
And any substance causing physical or psychological changes can be an issue.
Yes, particularly psychoactive drugs that affect the central nervous system, whether they're depressants like alcohol or opiates, stimulants like caffeine or cocaine, or hallucinogens. They all alter thinking, feeling, or behavior and impair your capacity to perform tasks safely.
The source presents a scenario about recognizing the signs of impairment or maybe severe fatigue in a colleague, someone who's worked an excessive shift on critical systems. That's a tough human factors challenge right there.
It really is. It highlights that conflict between professional standards and ensuring safety on one hand, and the potential discomfort of confrontation on the other. But the key insight from the source is that turning a blind eye just goes against the fundamental commitment to safety and professional responsibility. Ensuring fitness for work applies to yourself, but also having the courage to address concerns about colleagues.
Okay, so beyond internal and social factors, the physical environment where maintenance actually happens has a huge impact on performance.
Absolutely. The hangar, the ramp, working outdoors, these environments come with their own set of challenges. Noise, temperature extremes, exposure to hazardous substances.
And noise is just ever present, isn't it?
And as we discussed, it's fatiguing, it's disruptive. The source highlights again that while protection helps, it can interfere with communication and hearing warnings. It just reinforces the point that the environment isn't passive. It actively shapes the human factors risks involved.
And the range of fumes, chemicals, and toxic metals AMTs can be exposed to sounds pretty concerning.
It is, very much so. Things like carbon monoxide from exhausts, which is odorless and colorless but has severe effects. Toxic metals like cadmium or beryllium found in specific shop areas, sometimes with long-term health risks. Paints, primers, hydraulic fluids, and especially solvents.
The description of solvent risks in the source is quite stark.
Yeah, they're used everywhere for cleaning, right? But they can cause immediate irritation and damage to skin, eyes, respiratory systems. They can have narcotic effects on the nervous system and cause long-term damage to organs like the liver and kidneys.
Wow.
The key insight here is that these environmental exposures aren't just health and safety issues separate from human factors. They are human factors issues because they can impair an AMT's physical and cognitive ability to perform safely, sometimes subtly, sometimes acutely.
Illumination is also critical, tying back to our earlier discussion about vision.
Yeah, you need sufficient light for detailed work, obviously. But glare is also a hazard that reduces visibility and can definitely lead to errors.
Working in extreme temperatures, both heat and cold, presents significant risks too.
Absolutely. In the heat, there's that progression from heat cramps up to the potentially fatal heat stroke. The body tries to cool itself, but high temperatures and humidity can just overwhelm it. Hydration, rest breaks, crucial preventative measures.
And the cold, what are the key points there?
Hypothermia, dangerously low body temperature, is a major risk. And the source makes a really vital point. You don't need freezing temperatures for hypothermia.
Right.
Wet and windy conditions around 50 degrees air, maybe 10 degrees C, or even just water temps in the 60s Fahrenheit can cause it. The cold impairs motor skills, cognitive function shivering, clumsiness, confusion are early signs.
And working in the cold also increases heat loss from contact with materials, not just the air itself.
Exactly. Contact with cold surfaces or water, even your own perspiration counts, as water here dramatically increases heat loss. Prevention involves things like layering clothing, staying dry, using the buddy system to watch for signs in each other, pacing work to avoid heavy sweating. The human factors challenge here, again, is often the pressure to continue working in adverse conditions to meet deadlines, which directly increases the risk of cold-related impairment and errors.
Motion and vibration, like working on high platforms, cherry pickers, that kind of thing, is another physical environmental factor mentioned.
Yes, instability or movement forces you to focus energy on just maintaining your balance rather than concentrating fully on the task at hand. That increases the potential for distraction and errors.
So overall, the message about the working environment is that it's definitely not neutral. It can introduce significant challenges that directly impact an AMT's ability to perform safely.
It needs to be actively managed to support safety. And that includes not just the physical conditions, but also that positive social environment we talked about earlier, communication, support, a shared focus on safety.
Okay, let's shift focus now to the tasks themselves, the actual maintenance activities. How do human factors manifest in the design and execution of these tasks?
Well, it really starts with planning, ensuring that when a task is assigned, all the necessary resources are actually available. Qualified people, the right tools, correct parts, documentation facilities.
Because a lack of resources is a major driver of errors and violations, right?
Precisely. The source makes an interesting distinction between routine violations, which are sort of habitual deviations because rules are seen as maybe impractical or there's just an easier way people have found, and exceptional violations. These are often well-intentioned deviations made because there are problems like missing documentation or parts, and people feel pressure to get the job done anyway.
The example in the source about manufacturing a substitute cover plate without proper engineering approval because the real part wasn't available, that sounds like a perfect example of that exceptional violation.
It is. It highlights how resource issues can directly lead people to bend the rules, even with good intentions, and how that just erodes safety margins. The story about the undrilled torque tube illustrates the same point. Lack of resources, time constraints, leading to an unauthorized repair method.
What about repetitive tasks? They sound like they might be less risky, but the source says otherwise.
Yeah, the main danger with repetitive tasks is complacency. When you do something over and over again, you can easily stop engaging consciously.
Right, you go on autopilot.
Exactly. You might skip consulting the manual or the job card, assuming you know it by heart. But then you might miss critical updates or subtle variations in the task for that specific aircraft. This increases the risk of omissions or errors just due to inattention.
Visual inspection comes up again here, but in the context of the task itself.
Yeah, it's a core maintenance task with significant human factors involved. It requires not just good eyesight, but also training, experience, and judgment to recognize subtle defects. Using tools like magnifiers or borescopes helps, of course.
Sure.
But the human element of judgment remains absolutely key. The source mentions how technical bulletins can alert AMTs to known potential defects, like maybe specific types of staining to look for, which aids in this task.
And documentation, job cards, manuals is critical for task performance.
Absolutely critical. Written guidance is really the gold standard. Relying solely on verbal instructions from colleagues is inherently risky because information can be incorrect, incomplete, or misinterpreted along the way.
Yeah.
The supervisor's role in ensuring the correct documentation and resources are available before task starts is vital here.
Communication feels like the thread that just runs through all of this people, environment, tasks.
It's absolutely foundational to safety in a complex, team-based environment, like maintenance. Effective communication requires both the sender and the receiver to be active participants. The sender needs to be clear, concise.
And the receiver needs to listen.
Needs to listen, ask questions, confirm understanding. Trust is also a factor.
The source estimates a 3% error rate in oral communication in industrial settings. That's roughly 1 in every 30 exchanges going wrong. That seems quite high if you're relying solely on spoken words for critical information.
It is high. It really underscores why written documentation is preferred for precision tasks, but also why verbal communication needs to be disciplined and actively confirmed. Communication within and between teams is vital for building that shared mental model and maintaining situation awareness across a job or even across shifts.
Shift handover is highlighted as a particularly critical point for communication failure.
Oh, massively critical.
Yeah.
This is where errors can easily be introduced if information isn't transferred thoroughly and accurately. The source lists key information that needs to be handed over: tasks in progress, documentation status, any problems encountered, resources needed or available, where parts and tools are, next steps planned.
A lot to cover.
A lot to cover, yeah.
Written logs, face-to-face briefings, explicitly stating next steps. These are recommended ways to improve handovers.
Yes, those are key recommendations. And the idea of fostering a healthy skepticism on the incoming shift, double-checking and verifying information rather than just blindly accepting it, is a really good defense against errors carrying over from the previous shift.
Dissemination of information from, say, management or technical services down to the AMTs on the floor also sounds critical for safety.
Yeah, it's part of establishing that good safety culture we talked about. Ensuring that everyone who needs to know about a change in procedure or a new defect bulletin or a specific tool requirement actually receives and understands that information. Poor information flow has definitely been a contributing factor in many incidents.
The tips for improving communication in the source are pretty simple, but seem like powerful rules of thumb.
They are. Things like senders should be clear, maybe ask the receiver to repeat back or explain. Receivers should be prepared to listen actively, ask questions, trust the sender, but verify. Pay attention to nonverbal cues too.
Yeah.
Both parties should never assume, always resolve ambiguities, and if there's any disagreement on a critical point, take the most conservative action. It really boils down to a commitment to ensuring shared understanding.
Okay, so all these factors we've discussed are personal limits, team dynamics, stress, environment, task complexity, communication issues. They all seem to converge on the concept of human error.
Which, as we started with, is cited as the primary cause of most incidents. So understanding why errors happen is absolutely key to preventing them. The source references models like Professor Reason's, which helps categorize different types of errors.
Reason's model distinguishes between unintended actions and intended actions, right?
Right. Unintended actions happen often when our attention is somewhere else or we're distracted. These break down into slips and lapses.
Okay.
Slips are basically doing something other than what you intended to do, an error in execution. Like the source example of accidentally activating an emergency locator transmitter switch because it was poorly located or guarded. You didn't mean to flip it, but you did.
Got it. And lapses.
Lapses are forgetting to do something you intended to do, a memory failure. Like forgetting to remove tools from an engine bay, forgetting to close hatches, forgetting to torque nuts or replace oil caps. These often happen after an interruption.
So slips are about doing something wrong physically. Lapses are about forgetting to do something.
Broadly, yes.
Huh.
Then you have intended actions where the error is in the plan or the intention itself. These are mistakes or violations.
Okay. Mistakes involve a wrong plan. What kinds are there?
There are rule-based mistakes. This is where you apply a pre-existing rule or maybe a work habit that just doesn't fit the specific situation, or you misidentify the situation entirely and apply the wrong standard procedure. The source's example of pushing in a circuit fronter without checking the controls first fits here, applying a common rule inappropriately.
Right. And the other type of mistake?
Knowledge-based mistakes. These happen in novel or unfamiliar situations where there isn't a rule or habit to apply. You have to actively problem solve, but you come up with the wrong plan because you lack sufficient knowledge. Or maybe you make errors in testing your hypothesis or evaluating the situation.
And violations are different again because they're intentional.
Yes, violations are intentional deviations from known procedures. Routine violations are things that have become common practice or habit, maybe because the official rules are seen as too rigid or unnecessary, like judging bolt torque by feel instead of using a torque wrench, or using your own personal data instead of the manual.
Risky.
Very. And then exceptional violations are deliberate deviations, often with good intentions, usually made to overcome obstacles like missing parts or documents under pressure. The AMT knows they're deviating, but they might justify the risk to themselves to get the job done, like skipping a required engine run check to meet a tight deadline.
And these are dangerous because they consciously reduce the safety margin.
Exactly. Even if well-intentioned, they remove layers of defense.
These errors, of course, can ultimately lead to accidents. The Swiss cheese model is a really popular way to visualize accident causation, isn't it?
Yeah, it's very effective. It illustrates that accidents are rarely caused by just a single error. They happen when multiple layers of defense, things like good procedures, supervision, training, safety culture, all have holes or weaknesses in them.
Right.
And these holes momentarily align. This allows latent failures, those hidden system flaws, to combine with active failures, the individual's unsafe act, like a slip or mistake, and local events, creating a kind of window of opportunity for the accident to occur.
So it's really not just about the mechanic making a mistake in isolation. It's about understanding the system failures, the holes in the cheese that allow that mistake to happen and then propagate through the defenses.
Exactly. And that understanding is the whole basis for effective error management systems. The source specifically highlights Boeing's Maintenance Error Decision Aid, or MEDA.
MEDA. How does that help manage errors?
Well, its philosophy is key. It starts from the premise that mechanics don't intend to make mistakes.
Right.
Errors usually stem from workplace factors, unclear manuals, poor communication, wrong parts, pressure not from malice, and crucially, management can fix those contributing factors.
So how does the process work?
When a maintenance error occurs, MEDA triggers a structured investigation. It identifies who made the error, yes, but then critically, it uses interviews and checklists to identify the underlying contributing factors. Was it related to information, the environment, the task itself, communication, human limitations?
And the point isn't to blame the person who made the error.
No, absolutely not. The point is to understand the why behind the error so that management can implement changes maybe to the process, the environment, the training, the resources to prevent similar errors from happening again in the future. It's designed as a continuous loop of learning and improvement.
This focus on understanding the system rather than just blaming the individual feels like a massive and really important shift in approach.
It's absolutely fundamental to building a proactive safety culture rather than just reacting after something goes wrong.
Okay, bringing it sort of full circle, the source also covers workplace hazards. This links directly into traditional health and safety, but it's clearly a human factors issue too, because recognizing and managing hazards depends entirely on human awareness and action.
Yeah, a hazard is simply the potential for harm, a condition or an activity. The source introduces the job hazard analysis, or JHA technique, as a proactive way to identify these potentials before starting a task.
So before you even do the job, you pause and ask, is there anything here that could potentially hurt someone?
Precisely. And crucially, you involve the team doing the work because they have that unique practical understanding of the task and the environment. You list potential hazards, then you systematically identify controls to eliminate or reduce them.
And there's a hierarchy of controls.
Yes. Engineering controls first if possible, like better ventilation, guards on machinery. Then work practice controls, changing how the task is done safely. Then administrative controls, procedures, training, warning signs. And only as a last resort, personal protective equipment, PPE. PPE doesn't remove the hazard, it just protects the person.
The priority list for JHAs in the source makes sense. Focus on tasks with high injury rates or the potential for severe injury.
Exactly. Or maybe new or complex tasks where the risks might be less obvious. Emergency preparedness is another crucial hazard-related human factors area covered.
Knowing what to do when something inevitably does go wrong.
Right. Having a plan, having the right attitude, preparedness, not panic. Knowing where safety supplies are, ensuring clear, reliable communication channels are available and people know how to use them, radios, alarms, phones. Knowing the location of material safety data sheets, MSDS, for chemical exposures, understanding evacuation routes, and knowing basic first aid to assist injured colleagues until help arrives.
The source details specific emergencies like hypothermia, potential spinal injuries, strains, sprains, broken bones.
Yeah, recognizing the symptoms of hypothermia, for example, and knowing how to immediately stop further heat loss and begin rewarming safely. Understanding the critical importance of not moving someone with a suspected spinal injury unless they are in immediate life-threatening danger.
Right, like a fire.
Exactly. And if you absolutely must move them, keeping the head, neck, and shoulders perfectly aligned as a single unit, Knowing the signs of sprains or broken bones, when it's serious enough to call emergency services like bone poking through, obvious limb deformity, inability to use the limb, these are all critical human responses needed in emergencies.
Wow. We have truly journeyed through a complex landscape today, starting from that foundational understanding of why human factors are so paramount in maintenance.
Yeah. Moving through the incredible and sometimes surprising limitations of our own bodies and minds, exploring the really powerful influence of social dynamics and organizational culture.
Analyzing how things like stress, fatigue, and the physical environment can seriously degrade our performance, and then examining the tasks themselves, the communication challenges, and the systematic reasons why errors occur, and importantly, how we can learn from them.
It's just so clear that keeping aircraft safe in maintenance isn't only about technical skill. It's profoundly about understanding this complex interplay of human factors at the individual level, the team level, organizational, environmental, and task levels.
This knowledge is genuinely powerful. I mean, for AMTs, it's essential for their daily work, obviously. But really, for anyone managing processes or working in complex systems, it provides a framework for identifying risks and building more resilient systems that account for the reality of human performance and limitations.
Yeah, it shifts the focus, doesn't it? From
Yeah.
expecting perfection, which is unrealistic,
Right.
to designing systems that actually anticipate imperfections and provide effective layers of defense.
What's really fascinating here, I think, is how deeply intertwined our basic human nature, our capabilities, our limitations, our social needs, our reactions to stress and pressure, how intertwined all that is with the incredibly high standards of technical precision required to keep aircraft flying safely.
It highlights that the system defenses need to account for the human element, just as much as, if not more than, potential equipment failure.
Which raises a really important question for maybe everyone listening to think about. Given that human error is almost always a factor in incidents, and acknowledging these inherent limitations we have as humans, what does it truly mean to build a resilient system, whether that's in aviation maintenance or any complex field? What kind of defenses do we need to build that actively anticipate and mitigate these very human elements, building safety against ourselves in a way?
That's a question worth pondering deeply. Maybe think about where these human factors show up in your own daily life or work. Recognizing them, as we've seen, is always the first step.
Absolutely. Until next time, keep diving deep.